Wednesday Bible study at First Church. Today we are beginning a new book by Dr. Robert Letham on the Holy Spirit. Beautiful cover, I think. But more than that, it's a wonderful book that I think will be challenging to get through, but very rewarding as you hang in there with it. I hope that you've had an opportunity to take a look at the book. It begins with a variety of recommendations from, you may not recognize these names, but there are various professors of theology in major universities, or seminaries rather, across the country and around the world. So Dr. Letham is highly regarded as a theologian. And I'd encourage you to read through some of these recommendations just to give you some sense of the stature of Dr. Letham in the Reformed community, the place that he holds. One interesting aspect of his work has been his efforts to understand Eastern Orthodoxy. And he has a book called, I think, Eastern Orthodoxy Through Western Eyes, in which he notes the differences between Eastern Orthodoxy and Western Protestant Reformed theology. We're often acquainted with Roman Catholicism and the views there, but Eastern Orthodoxy, with its Russian and Greek aspects, is something that is a bit strange to us. But Dr. Letham worked on that and has a very interesting and intriguing book in that regard. One of the reviews of his work spoke about that. No, I'm sorry, the preface or the foreword to the book by Cornelius Venema talks about his work on Eastern Orthodoxy as a very important seminal work with attempts to try to bring together the two sides of the historic Christian church. So much to consider there with Dr. Letham. My own experience with him began at Westminster Seminary years ago when I was a student there at Westminster. At Philadelphia's campus, he taught the doctrine of the Holy Spirit, and I remember my impressions of him as being a profound scholar. He very knowledgeable. He was quoting this author and that author and throwing up all kinds of information in front of me, and so it was a blessing to get acquainted with him there and learn from his grasp of the doctrine of Christ. And then years later, our paths crossed again in the Philadelphia Presbytery as he served as a pastor in our church in Wilmington. And so I would get to meet him at Presbytery or hear him address certain issues on the floor of Presbytery. And then eventually I got to work with him directly when there were some problems down in Wilmington. So he's a top-flight scholar, a great gentleman. He's British, so you get to appreciate a little bit of his accent as well. I hope that you'll get a bit of a flavor of his life and ministry with this book. It turns out that this book is one of 3 that are being written. This is the first volume that has come out on the Holy Spirit. He has 2 more volumes coming out on the Son and the Father. So he's taking the Trinity and addressing each member of the Trinity and devoting a book to each member of the Trinity. He has a book on the Holy Trinity, which is an award-winning book on that topic. So I think he's a terrific scholar. I encourage you to work through this stuff. Some of it's not going to be entirely easy. We're going to get a lot of terms, vocabulary in front of us that There it is. Rick has it on the screen there, Holy Trinity. You can see my copy right about there. But if you look at the end of each chapter, he'll have a list of key terms. This is what we got at the end of the first chapter here. And this chapter has a lot of terms that we're going to run across, so this is going to be a little bit thick to get through. The other chapters are not quite so lengthy. For example, here's the second chapter in the list of names, or words. And these terms get repeated, so we're doing a lot of the legwork here in this first chapter and getting the basic terminology down. And once you have that terminology down, that will make things much easier as we go along. The book begins with a review of the history of the church and the teachings of the church, or the struggle of the church with regard to the person and work of the Holy Spirit. So we're going to get a review of church history here first, and then he'll go into the exposition of the scriptures after it. And I debated with myself as to which to do. I was kind of inclined to think that the best approach would be to begin with the scriptures themselves, go through that, Old and New Testament, and then at the end of it he has various issues that have arisen on the Holy Spirit in a more contemporary environment, and so like Pentecostalism and so forth. So we'll get into that as well at the end, but I decided that he's a little bit smarter than me on things, so I'll follow his guide here. Dr. Venema in the forward mentions this plan of attack on the part of Letham, and he favored it, I think, so that you can get the key terms, concepts, and ideas in your head. Then when you get into the scriptures, you're prepared, more sensitive to what the scriptures have to say, rather than just kind of coming across these things inductively and making our way through them. So we'll follow that path as far as we can. In this chapter here, he covers the first 300 years or so of the Christian church history. We're going to come across a couple of major figures during that period of time, the first of which will be Irenaeus, and then a second major figure, not including Didymus the Blind, is going to be, let's see if I can find it, Basil the Great. So Irenaeus, Basil, and then we got the Gregories, Gregory of Nyssa and Gregory of Nazianzus. So those were major figures in the first 3 centuries of the church, the early church. And so we'll consider their contribution to the topic. And then when we get into the second chapter, we have perhaps some others who are better known, including Augustine, St. Augustine. Remember, he wrote The City of God. Cyril of Alexandria, we don't perhaps know too much, or John of Damascus. But we're going to get into some serious stuff here with the filioque clause. But then the third chapter goes from Anselm to Bart, so that's covering 1,000 years, roughly. So we're going to fly through some things there. He'll basically talk about Anselm, Calvin, and Bart. So we're not covering everybody that could be covered, but getting the highlights and the most important figures. So I think I said in my email message we'll start with the first chapter, but I think I'll go before that to what's described as part 1. He has a summary statement on the Holy Spirit and the Trinity, which is a very profound, concise statement, which I think sets the stage for everything we're going to uncover as we go along, so we shouldn't skip that. Let me read that for you. I'm not going to make much comment on it because the rest of the book is about this, but let's read it. The Holy Spirit is one of the three Trinity hypostases, or persons, fully God, without remainder, of one identical and indivisible being with the Father and the Son. The Spirit, together with the Father and the Son, is Creator and Redeemer. Together with the Father and the Son, the Spirit is to be worshiped and adored. In all of God's works, the Spirit is active inseparably with the Father and the Son. Yet since each of God's works is specifically the work of a particular Trinitarian person, so too the Spirit is attributed the effective power by which these works are accomplished. But we must always see this in the context of harmonious, united, and inseparable action. All our thought about the Holy Spirit, in terms of both the inner life of the Holy Trinity and also his works in creation and grace, must proceed on this basis. The Church's recognition of these realities took time to develop and come to articulate expression. This section surveys that process. It reflects the cumulative biblical exegesis of the whole Church. A knowledge of how that took place will help us to put in perspective questions that arise in our own day. So he begins with one of those words that we're going to come across in the course of discussions about the Trinity and particularly the Holy Spirit, this Latin word hypostases. Hypostases. I'm not sure how you want to pronounce that, but it means in English persons. But there was a considerable debate in the early church with regard to the correct word to use in describing the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit and their relationships to each other. And so hypostases was one of those words that they finally latched onto. And we'll develop that as we go along. The other thing I wanted to highlight here is the emphasis on the whole church, the biblical exegesis of the whole church. You need to remember that what we have here is the early Christian church, what some folks have described as the great church, as it gets started from the days of the apostles and prophets, moving on across Asia Minor, Rome, going into Europe. In fact, one of the first individuals we'll consider has his ministry principally in Lyon, France. So we're seeing the advance of the gospel and the church across, or at least into Europe. And this is the great church. So you don't have the Roman Catholic Church becoming the principal church. In fact, actually Byzantium was a major church at the time, and so also was the church in Jerusalem, of course. These were all major churches of the day. We don't have the primacy of Rome, as at least Rome thinks of itself, but it was the great church, the people of God scattered across, and the whole church coming to wrestle with different things. I hope to make some comments about Irenaeus and his relationship to Rome as well, and some of the things that he had to deal with there in Rome. So we get to the first chapter, the title of which is The Road to Constantinople. I'm reminded of the song, Do You Know the Way to San Jose? We're on the road here, and we're not looking back. Why Constantinople? Well, that's where there will be a synod of the church of that early time, where they will discuss the person of the Holy Spirit. So that's what's in Constantinople, and that's why we're headed in that direction. But it's going to take us a little while to get there, so let's begin with the opening portion of the book here, the Holy Spirit in the Church Fathers. And we're going to be talking about Irenaeus, who was a disciple of Polycarp, who himself was a disciple of John the Apostle. So we're very, very close to the very beginnings of Christianity here. So we'll read here, in order to appreciate the presence and work of the Holy Spirit today, we need to ask how this has been seen over the past 2,000 years of the Church's existence. Such a search is not merely a merely antiquarian exercise. It is vital for us to ensure that our own thinking is within the parameters shaped by more than 50 generations of those who have gone before us. How else can we be clear that our experience is demonstrably Christian? We have 2 millennia of accumulated wisdom, biblical exegesis, and concentrated thought to guide us. While not all of it may seem fruitful, much, if not most, will. Besides, attempting to reinvent the wheel is a fruitless exercise and has frequently led to serious error or even heresy. So he's given us a bit of a justification for looking at the history of the church and what theologians, pastors, and teachers have discovered along the way. And it seems to me that today, very much within the Christian community, we kind of have the approach that we're here today and you have the Bible back long ago, and all we're doing is going from the Bible to today, and everything that's in between doesn't matter all that much. And we've very much forgotten it. You know, in our Reformed churches, we'll talk about Luther and Calvin and their influence, but we tend to forget about many of the others in the course of the history of the church. And so we're missing out on the rich tradition that comes to us through the centuries, as various theologians have had to wrestle with these things and come to grips with them. So Letham is kind of reminding us that there's much more to the Christian church than just we are experiencing today. In fact, in some respects, our modern age is very much going back to the beginning again, with the Gnosticism that Irenaeus had to contend with in his day. We have once more in our present day an emphasis on the Gnostic Gospels and other alternative spiritualities. Dr. Jones is introducing us to that a little bit more in our Sunday school. As Ecclesiastes says, and I can tie a few things here with regard to Rick, there's nothing new under the sun. Things come back again, and if you don't pay attention to history, then, as they say, you're doomed to repeat it. So it's good for us to look at what the early church fathers had to say about the Holy Spirit. The first 4 centuries of the church involved a slow process through which a clearer grasp of the Holy Spirit's identity emerged. Because of controversial proposals that undermined Christ's divine status, the dominant focus was on the relation of the Son to the Father. Consequently, less attention was given to the Spirit. In the first 2 centuries, this Spirit was generally considered as the Creator. By the late 2nd century, a threat had emerged from forms from forms of monarchianism, which excessively stressed the unity of God, the one rule, or monarchy, eroding the distinctiveness of the 3 persons. In this, it was held that God's revelation as the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit was for the purposes of redemptive history only, and did not represent eternal realities. The consequence was that if this were true, we could have no valid knowledge of God, since his revelation in human history would not disclose who he is eternally. This provoked a reaction from Irenaeus and especially Tertullian. Eventually, the church rejected this form of modalism, known as Sabellianism, at the Synod of Antioch in 268 AD. Okay, so Letham reminds us that the understanding of the church on these topics took time to develop. You can't just look back into these days and match the theological reflection and depth of understanding that we have today and just look at it present in those days. They did have much to offer. There was tremendous amounts there, but still, this theology was hard fought, and it was tough to gain over time. And quite often, at times, it was provoked by heresies that came up within the life of the church, challenging the pastors and theologians to come together and answer these kinds of things. So, and then Letham highlights the fact that much of the controversy at the start was with regard to the nature of the Son as opposed to the nature of the Holy Spirit. And so, if you will, the hard work was done during these discussions about whether the Son of God was equal with the Father, or whether he was a lower order of being, some angel or something to that effect. And so there was a lot of emphasis on the relationship between the Son and the Father, and the Spirit was kind of off in the background. It's not that they didn't believe in the divinity of the Spirit or the divinity of the Son, but they had to work through their explanations for how that came about and defend those ideas from the false ideas that were percolating throughout the early history of the world. So less attention was given to the Spirit, which again makes me wonder, for Dr. Letham, why didn't he start with the doctrine of the Father and then go to the doctrine of the Son and then finally with the doctrine of the Holy Spirit? That would seem to be more chronological in some sense and lay the foundation for understanding the Spirit along the way. He's chosen to go the other direction again, so I'm sure he has purposes for that. But here he notes that there came about in the early church in the 2nd century this monarchianism. You have a monarch, a king, and the Father is the monarch, the king over all, and the Son and the Spirit tend to be lower orders of being, or in the form of what he describes as modalism, is the idea that God is one person, but he appears in history first as a father during the Genesis and the history of the church under the Old Covenant period of time, and then he comes off as the Son and appears as the Son, particularly in the Gospels, and finally as the Spirit. So there are different modes, or if you will, different faces that the one God puts on. At one moment he's the Father, at one moment he's on the Son, another moment he's the Spirit. You might think of Greek tragedy, Greek drama, in which the actors would put on a different face, a mask, and for a period of time they would wear one mask to represent one personality in the play. Then they would take that mask off, put a second mask on, maybe to represent a woman or some other different character in the story. And that's monarchianism, which emphasizes the dominion of the Father, but then and the modalistic aspects of it takes on this various pictures of God as different persons, but in fact it's just one person, the one God. So that's modalism. It's also known as Sabellianism. So you got three words here that are describing the same thing: monarchianism, and actually there were two forms of monarchianism. One is this modalism that Letham speaks of, and the other was a dynamic modalism based on revelation of God's power. That's a whole different, a little different thing, but the modalism was the more prominent and the larger issue in the day. Sabellianism is just the same thing, named after one of the prominent teachers in this area, Sabellius. So sometimes it's not a good thing to have a theology named after you because it's a heresy. Sabellianism is a heresy. We got Calvinism and Lutheranism, those are good. Sabellianism, Arianism, Arminianism, those are not good. And so sometimes be careful. You might not want to have everybody know your name. But we come here first of all to Irenaeus. Now Irenaeus grew up in Asia Minor, but and there he became acquainted with the early church father. I'm forgetting his name, but he was commissioned to go to Lyon, France, and serve as a presbyter to the church there, along with another fellow by the name of Pothinus. And Pothinus was the bishop of Lyons, and Irenaeus would be a supporter, a presbyter in that regard. And later, Irenaeus would be sent on a delegation to the church in Rome to plead for a certain amount of liberty for the Montanists, and that's a whole other topic for another day. But while Irenaeus was there in Rome, he spoke with the bishop there, Eleutherus, and was quite upset that Eleutherus was adopting the more Gnostic ideas that were percolating in the day. So that prompts Irenaeus to go on and write his major work Against Heresies, which is 5 books in total, in which he explains the nature of these different heresies, Gnosticism, all of its ins and outs. It's a very confusing and complex thing, and you don't want to be bogged down reading into that. You'll really question that. And then he argues against it, and then he develops some more positive things. But Irenaeus addresses those heresies. So here, Letham notes that he was born in about the year 130 AD and lived to about the year 200, so about 70 years of age when he passed. In his developed theology, Irenaeus, Bishop of Lyon, used a striking image that points to a triadic view of God. Writing against Gnosticism, which is flesh is evil, and we want to move towards the spirit realm, and we do that through knowledge, through insight, through mysteries. Gnosticism, writing against Gnosticism, which posited a supreme entity from which a chain of beings emanated, involving angelic intermediaries, Irenaeus repeatedly wrote of the Father's having created by his 2 hands. Alluding to Genesis 1, verse 26, and asserting creation ex nihilo, he wrote that God stood in need of no angel to help him, as if he did not possess his own hands. For with him were always present the Word and wisdom, the Son and the Spirit, by whom and in whom, freely and spontaneously, he made all things, to whom also he speaks, saying, Let us make man after our image and likeness. The Son and the Spirit are both co-eternal with the Father, he argued, and one with him, for they share in what is exclusively a work of God. So the Father plans and gives commands, the Son performs and creates, while the Spirit nourishes and increases. It's a rather striking image and a helpful image when he speaks of God the Father with his 2 hands, the Son and the Spirit. And so the Father goes to work in creating the world, and redeeming the lost using his two hands, Son and Spirit. And this emphasizes the unity of God, the Father, Son, and Spirit, their joint work in the aspects of creation and redemption. So it denies this chain of being theology which Gnosticism introduced, where really all is one. You're going to hear echoes of what Dr. Peter Jones describes as oneism or monism. All is one, and there's a gradation of being from the Spirit, the God, all the way through angels, through humanity, through animal life, to stones and dirt and so forth. And so there's a great chain of being throughout all of humanity, throughout all of creation, and all is one. And so we all have a bit of the divine within us. Angels more so than us. We have more than the animals. Animals more than plants and trees and rocks and so forth. So Gnosticism has this chain of being, and you rise up to higher levels through various mysteries that come to you. Irenaeus speaks against that, and so Irenaeus was one who defended twoism, again to borrow the language of Peter Jones. Twoism, God is separate from his creation. He's not identified with his creation. And so Irenaeus viewed the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit as unique, separate, one eternal God, whereas everything else is created, creaturely dependent in its existence upon this one eternal God. So we have this very helpful illustration of the Son and the Spirit as the two hands of God at work in the creation and redemption of all things. He continues, we're on page 5 now of our book, Our Likeness. And for this reason, in the last times, his hands formed a living man, in order that Adam might be created again after the image and likeness of God. Second Adam, of course, being Jesus himself. The translation of Enoch and Elijah followed a similar pattern, for, quote, by means of the very same hands through which they were molded at the beginning, did they receive this translation and assumption. Remember, both Enoch and Elijah were, if you will, raptured up from this world. They did not die themselves. They were caught up into the heavens. And so that's the idea of translation. And he sees the work of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit in all of this. For in Adam, the hands of God had become accustomed to set in order, to rule, and to sustain his own workmanship, and to bring it and place it where they pleased. So for Irenaeus, God's whole work of creation, providence, and grace was carried out by his two hands, the Son and the Holy Spirit. At first sight, this seems to subordinate the Son and the Spirit as merely God's agents. In fact, before the Council of Nicaea in AD 325, some form of subordination was endemic. It was kind of built into the system. But Irenaeus did not consider the two hands external to God. They are unmistakably divine, always with the Father. There is but one God, while the Son was always with the Father, and the Spirit was present with him, anterior to all creation. Those are quotes from Irenaeus' book Against Heresies. Henry Sweet remarks that as the hands of God, they are divine and co-equal. The Father has first place, however, and salvation focuses on union with him. So Irenaeus takes this over to the idea of the creation of Adam and the incarnation, and the image of the creation of Adam out of the dust of the earth and his body being formed and fashioned is kind of the way he sees the two hands of God at work in the creation of Adam, and so also in the second Adam as well. Yes, I'm aware it's not working. I don't know. Let me close out and come back. So if you'll note those who are online there, I'm going to come right back. So just hold one moment.